You're watching postPerspective's Meet the Artist podcast, sponsored by Puget Systems.
Hi, I'm Randi Altman with postPerspective, and welcome to another episode of our Meet the Artist podcast. For this installment, we spoke to Jason Zimmerman and Brian Tatosky, who headed up the visual effects team on Paramount Plus's Picard. Enjoy. Hi, we're here with Jason and Brian, some of the VFX team from Picard. And before we jump into that show, which is fantastic and I love, I'd like to find out a little bit about your backgrounds, your path to VFX, how it all began, what inspired you, and let's go alphabetically. Brian, how about you start?
So my parents watched Star Trek, so I got into science fiction at a very early age. I love Star Wars. I wanted to learn everything that there was to how they made it, reading behind the scenes book that they wrote on Empire Strikes Back, gobbling up everything that they could. I learned video production in high school, actually, and followed through in college learning about, new advances, that there was now digital effects. You could do stuff on the computer, so I followed up into that and learning stuff on my own while I was doing video production jobs. Eventually landed at Rhythm and Hughes for 15 years, where I spent time in the commercial department and the features department and everything in between working on that, and just furthered into the field from there.
Okay. Jason, how about your path?
Similar path. I mean, from an early age, obviously Star Wars, Star Trek caught my attention as a kid. And then growing up, movies were super important to my family. So we watched every weekend. That was what we did. And it was not just science fiction, but all sorts of things. And I always just sort of loved and was drawn to the science fiction of it all. And then when I was 16, I actually had a moment sitting in the theater watching Jurassic Park. And I said, this is what I want to do. So I found a degree that was called video film art at the time. It wasn't even visual effects. And so I went into that and got my first sort of internship unpaid out of college. And I've been doing this job ever since.
So did you guys start with learning the software and the tools used for visual effects, or was it more, watching other people first and then developing those skills?
I mean, it's kind of a little bit of both. I mean, my background was actually in video production and editing, so I did a lot of practical shooting of things, and at the time a lot of the tools were sort of new and coming out, at least for the digital part. So it was one of those things where I'd spend evenings making little spaceships and making little flying logos and things like that to learn, and daytime was actual production time. But it's one of those things that I want to gobble up any sort of information for whenever, so any opportunity to learn either hands-on or through classes or whatever was something that I was just after.
So what about going on set as visual effects supervisor and learning the right ways to be shooting stuff and the wrong ways to be shooting stuff and working with green screen? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. It starts when you're part of a crew, like a commercial crew doing visual effects, and somebody says, oh, we need an extra person. And you go to set and, you kind of get dropped into the world and you start to help somebody else out by taking measurements and just being their gopher person running around, and get a feel for how set works and the dynamics and the first AD and all that sort of thing. It's like everything else. It's accumulated experience over time where you just learn those bits, and when you're working on set, you're kind of making your own meal that you're going to eat later. So when you shoot that stuff and then you bring it back in and you have to composite it, and you realize, oh, well, I should have done this, or this actually worked out okay. Oh, I made this disaster for myself, because then you're the person that actually has to put it together. You learn very quickly what can work and what doesn't work, and you also get a good sense of realizing with all the things that do happen on set, maybe you give the people that are shooting the things on set a little more of a break than you would otherwise when you're sitting there as a compositor thinking, why didn't they do this right? You see all the reasons why. It's it's really tough and time consuming on set, and everything is go, go, go all the time.
Yeah, I mean, to Brian's point, we both have a compositing background. That's where I started. That's where he started. And I think from compositing, you get a really good sense of like everything that goes into the process, because you deal with the other departments within, CG and match move and roto and all that stuff. But then you're also responsible for the final product. And so when you're working on a shot, you start to, like Brian said, sort of ask the questions, why was it shot this way? Why does it not look the way we would like it to look, or any of those sorts of things? And so I think there's a little bit of a learning that happens just from doing the shots. And then, for me, kind of the same experience. You just sort of start to get, invited to set every once in a while to cover for somebody who can't make it. And then you start to learn the sort of the set dynamics of things. So it's definitely a learning experience and a learning curve. And the only way you can learn is sort of by doing it and by doing the shots.
Makes sense. Now, so what about in Picard? Were you guys on set? Was some of it virtual production?
No virtual production. Brian was on set. I was on set for a lot of season 1. I sort of oversee all of the Trek shows for Paramount Plus. So I helped sort of set that one up, and then we were, fortunate enough to grab Brian, and he came in. And so for season 2 and season 3, he was more the day-to-day on set guy. Also, by the way, we did it during pandemic, so that was sort of a different, set of challenges and a lot more strict in terms of how many people could be on set and where and all that. But I think, Brian can talk to that a little bit more, but that's sort of the basic setup.
Yeah, Jason, for better or worse, because he's in charge of all the Star Trek shows, is extremely busy. So, he's there every time something super important is happening on set, but also it's a big draw on his constantly used time. Plus the COVID of it all, that you have to test a certain amount in advance before you're allowed on set. There's different groups of people who are allowed in different areas depending on how often they test and how up-to-date their testing is. So it was a really rigorous process, especially on Picard season 2 and 3, that kept us all extremely safe and kept the production running, extremely smoothly. But it also did limit the availability of people to come in on set without a lot of proper, like, early scheduling and early advance notice. So, so I was the day-to-day person that was there every day for, all the practical shooting, plus, doing meetings and that sort of thing that I would take on set just to get the future episodes going as we're shooting the current ones.
That makes sense. Now, how many visual effects shots were you guys averaging per episode, even just for season 3?
I think it's around 150 to 200 an episode would be our average. It's probably 150 or so of actual visual effects type of things that you may notice. And then I would say maybe around 50 of where you get into fixes and where you get into beauty work and you get into some of that stuff that DI also assists with, and just, smoothing out makeup things and fixing little production stuff that may be in the background of a shot and stuff like that.
Right. Now, so Picard is part of Star Trek Next Generation. It's fairly iconic. The visual effects, how did you guys tackle those, with like sort of giving a nod to the old series, but also making this series its own in terms of visual effects? How much did you take from before, and how did you bump it up? What's new?
With Trek, you have such an incredible library of previous iterations of the show, previous effects, previous versions of ships, all those sorts of things. So you have to, especially because Brian and I both do, work on all the different shows. And so I think you definitely have to start by looking at what came before you. If it's anything that's attached to canon, you have to make sure that you're honoring what came before, not just from a visual standpoint, but also, is it in keeping with what the fans are expecting? A lot of these things for the fans are very much beloved, and so it's important to start by looking at canon and looking in the past to see how things have been done. And in this season, and Brian can sort of drill down on this a little bit more, but season 3 of Picard, there was a desire to definitely pay homage and reference as much as we could some of the things that had come before us on Next Gen. In fact, there were areas where we used almost the exact same effect without even updating it, to make sure that it was sort of true to the vision, and that's a credit to Terry, our showrunner, as well, because that was something that was really important to him. But at the same time, we do have new tools and technology. I don't know if it's like doubles in speed every 6 months or whatever the saying is, but we're very lucky to have all of those technological advances, and so we do try to apply those things and update them as much as we can while still sort of staying true to the original intent of the look.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jason nailed it right there. It's Terry, as the EP, had a clear idea for the storyline of the show, for the look of the show, the fact that he's a big fan of those original Star Trek movies, and that influenced his ideas on the type of Star Trek that he wanted to show on the screen. So, all the dialogue was sort of between visual effects and the producers were about that visual look and wanting things to look in that sort of cinematic format. So it was our job to take that cinematic language and that cinematic look, but then update it to what people expect in 2023 as far as resolution and quality and plussing it further from that established sort of cinema language. And that was a lot of fun to do because it was kind of the best of worlds, and the fact that we take this really cool stuff that we loved as a kid, but it's like, how do we push that forward and make it look even more interesting and make it serve the storyline, which is always the most important part, but how do we push it further?
So there was a lot of that sort of the phasers, the transporters, the stuff like that, the ships, obviously. But this season had a lot of new things like the changelings, and there was, of course, the Borg cube and then the museum of all the spaceships. So if you had to look back, what was the most difficult or most challenging or a scene that you were most proud of from this season?
Brian, you want to go first?
I mean, there's a bunch of stuff. It was fun to update the changelings and make this new version of them because they're not the normal changelings from before because they've been experimented on. So it was fun to come up with this little more horrifying look of sort of organs and muscle look that it had, which was kind of gross and goopy as they're moving around. That was really fun to experiment with, like I said, how far we could push that kind of gooey look, but still have touches of that gold color and still have touches of the changeling feel that we expect. But we've obviously pushed it a lot farther. That was really enjoyable to work on. But also I enjoyed working with some of the classic feel of doing these cinematic ships where we could really show them off and show off the scale of the ships and kind of have them move like we expect these big ships to move, but also push the most dynamic camera moves that we can do, the most dynamic staging of the ships that we can do, so that we could just, take all the things that are cool about Trek right now, but also honor all the original, cinematic looks and stuff at the same time. That I think is so much fun to be able to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think, it's every Trek show is a challenge because there's, they're very, very unique to each particular show. But the most fun, I think, and also the most terrifying is the legacy stuff. It's the, when you see the Enterprise again or you see the Borg cube again, because it's going to be scrutinized like probably nothing else in sci-fi because of, the fan base and, just the importance of Star Trek. And so I think it's, when you read the script, you first go, oh my God, I get to play with the Enterprise. And you go, oh God, I got to do the Enterprise. And then you realize like, I got to make this great. And it's got to look as good as, anything anybody's ever seen. But at the same time, it's got to, fill that sort of nostalgia box and make sure that everybody is, loves the way that it looks. And you haven't departed too far from, what the original is. So I think, the museum, seeing all those cool ships, the Borg cube is always fun to work with. It's a gigantic asset. It's a gigantic thing to film. But yeah, I think the legacy ships, every time we get to play with something new that's from the past of Trek is very exciting.
Do you guys work with a bunch of different VFX vendors? If so, want to name some?
We do. Yeah. Off the top of my head, Ghost, both in LA and Denmark, Outpost, Barnstorm, Crafty Apes. Who am I missing, Brian?
Storm.
Storm.
We love Storm as well.
And we have, these are a lot, like we use these vendors for all of our shows because we've developed relationships over the years, and they've sort of grown in terms of how they know how to, address our shots and everything. So it's definitely been a partnership, and each iteration and each episode of the show gets a little bit better because of our relationships with them. So
yeah, it's fun because, we do have a lot of shortcuts with them. And once they sort of understand the visual style of this particular show, because each show is a little different from each other, as does sort of, essentially the looks of them, once they get that down, and they just produce incredible work for us.
And the fun thing with the vendors is, Star Trek has always been a very, very important show for visual effects, both in features and in television. So everybody's extremely passionate about working on the show. It's, we don't ever have to convince them to do their best. I mean, everybody that, every artist around the world that works on this grew up on Trek just like we did, loves Trek, knows a lot of the canon like we do. And so it's really like this fun collaboration because everybody is so invested creatively in making the best version of every shot that they can.
Yeah. I mean, we really want them to collaborate with us, and we want to use their expertise and their knowledge because, it's really only by working together do we get the best work that we can. So we're always open to their suggestions and their ideas of, like, why don't we do this, or why don't we move the ship this way, or add this light here, or what if the changeling could do this? And, the net result is that we get, amazing things that sometimes we wouldn't even think were possible.
So Picard is over, but you have other Star Trek shows that you're working on. Do you save? I mean, assets from Picard? Do you use it for others, and vice versa, saving yourselves a little bit of time and work?
Yeah, I mean, we have a big library now. So we've done, since Discovery was the first one that sort of reintroduced Trek into television. Since then, the team and I have done probably 10 seasons of Star Trek, all in between all the different shows, between Discovery, Strange New Worlds, the shorts, all those, Picard. So we have a really big library that we draw on for many different things, depending on what the shots need. But you build that up, and then when you need something, you may not need to build things from scratch. So we're fortunately building a great sort of legacy library for all the things that will come next.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
we just spend a lot of time making sure that the right ship goes with the right time period, and we are always thinking of canon in the back of our head, and because we've inherited this giant legacy of an amazing universe, and we just want to make sure to do right by it.
It's fantastic. Before I let you guys go, what's next? What do you see happening next in terms of visual effects in general, and in terms of these shows? Anything that you could talk about?
Oh, well, visual effects in general, I mean, we're obviously virtual productions having a moment. That's not going to go anywhere. I think that's just going to get more and more commonplace. It's a really fun time to be in visual effects because there is so much good work out there. Not just, our shows, of course, we're partial to that, but there's a lot of great work on there right now. And so it's fun for me as a fan of just visual effects in general to look around and see what our peers are doing, because everybody's doing such great work. And the visual effects of television have come so far that, we're very, very fortunate to live in a time where it's basically sort of indistinguishable from features at this point if you get the right show. So, we cheer on our peers. We watch the other shows. We love what's happening. And there's just so much content for us to see there, which is really, really nice to be a part of. And then what's next for us? I mean, there's a plan for Trek for the foreseeable future. And, Section 31 obviously is coming up, in addition to other shows, and, Strange New Worlds will be cranking up here pretty soon. So, we've got a lot of fun content, and everything's a little bit different. It's not, cookie cutter. Everything has its own personality. Every show kind of has its own tone. And so we're really excited in the sense that it's not the same thing every day for us. It really is a challenge each and every day to do something unique and different. So we're very happy for that.
Yeah, I mean, with Prodigy and Lower Decks and our shows, I mean, it's never been a better time to be a Star Trek fan, and there's never been more Star Trek for you in particular, and whatever that you is that you like. There's Star Trek out there for you, and that's pretty awesome.
Jason, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you for watching Post Perspectives Meet the Artist podcast, sponsored by Puget Systems. For more information, please visit PugetSystems.com.